He wasn't supposed to react. Not to a sound no one else could hear, not to a voice that never rose above a whisper, and certainly not in the middle of a crowded Saturday morning where laughter, footsteps, and distant traffic folded into one steady hum. But Rex did, his ears lifting just a fraction, his body going still in a way that didn't belong to training, didn't belong to instinct, didn't belong to anything Daniel Hayes had ever seen in 6 years of working side by side with him. The town. Square smelled faintly of roasted coffee and warm pavement, sunlight bouncing off storefront glass. A breeze carrying the soft Russell flags above the Marine recruiting booth where Daniel stood in full uniform. Posture straight, eyes scanning like they always did, but Rex wasn't scanning anymore. He was listening to something that wasn't there, something buried beneath the noise of the world. And then Daniel saw her, a little girl standing near the edge of the crowd. Maybe 7 years old, small frame wrapped in a pale blue dress that moved gently in the wind. Her shoes dusty at the toes like she'd walked farther than she should have, her hair catching the light in soft strands of gold. And her eyes, steady, unblinking, fixed not on the people, not on the booth, but on Rex, as if she had been waiting for him, as if she already knew he would hear her when no one else could. Daniel followed Rex's gaze, brow tightening slightly, the subtle shift of tension in his shoulders the only sign something fell off, because Rex didn't fixate without cause, didn't break pattern without a reason rooted in scent or command. Yet there was no alert posture, no trained signal, just that stillness, that quiet, almost reverent attention. And then the girl's lips moved, barely, a whisper shaped, but never carried, not by wind, not by breath, not by anything Daniel could perceive. And yet Rex responded, a low, almost inaudible exhale leaving him as his weight shifted. Forward one deliberate inch, the leash pulling taut between them. Daniel's hand instinctively tightening. Heel, he said softly, calm, controlled, the word they had repeated thousands of times across training fields and deployment zones. A word Rex had never once ignored, not once. But the command hung there, unanswered as Rex's ears flicked again, his eyes locked with hers, something passing between them that had no language, no signal Daniel recognized, only a feeling. Like the air had changed, like the noise of the square had dimmed just enough to make room for something else, something quieter, deeper, older than reason. The girl didn't step closer, didn't call out. She only stood there, her small hand lifting slightly at her side, fingers curling inward as if holding on to something invisible. And Daniel felt it then, that subtle, creeping unease, not fear, not danger, but the kind of feeling you get when a memory brushes past you without permission, when something familiar stands where it shouldn't be. And Rex took another step, just one, but it was enough to break formation, enough to make the leash pull harder, enough for Daniel's voice to sharpen. Rex, heel. And still the dog didn't turn, didn't glance back, didn't acknowledge the command, his entire focus anchored to that child, as if she were the only thing in the world that made sense. Around them, people kept moving, unaware, conversations drifting, a stroller passing by, a car horn sounding faintly from the street. Life continuing exactly as it should, except for this one moment that refused to fit, this one silent exchange that bent the rules Daniel had built his life around. And he felt his grip loosen, not by choice, not fully, but just enough for doubt to slip in, because Rex had saved lives before, had sensed things no human could, had proven time and again that sometimes instinct reached further than logic. And now here he was standing between what he knew and what he couldn't explain, watching a dog he trusted more than most men listen to a voice he himself could not hear. And the girl, she smiled faintly, not wide, not bright, just enough to suggest recognition, just enough to make it feel like this. Wasn't the first time something like this had happened, like she had done this before, whispered into silence and been heard by something willing to listen. And Rex's tail moved once, slow, uncertain, like a question, like a promise waiting to be understood. Before we begin, tell me, we're witching from Drop Your Country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. Daniel Hayes had learned a long time ago that hesitation could cost seconds, and seconds could cost everything. But this did not feel like hesitation. This felt like standing at the edge of something he could not name. His grip still firm on the leash, but no longer absolute. The tension between his hand and Rex no longer about control, but about understanding. And Rex leaned forward again, not pulling, not lunging, just moving with a quiet certainty that unsettled something deep in Daniel's chest, because this was not disobedience. It was intention. And intention meant reason, even if that reason lived somewhere Daniel could not reach. The girl remained where she stood, small against the wide openness of the square, her presence somehow untouched by the movement around her, people brushing past without noticing, a man laughing into his phone, a couple arguing softly near the fountain, a vendor calling out about fresh lemonade. Life continuing in its ordinary rhythm, and yet there was a pocket of stillness around her, like the world had agreed to leave her alone, and Rex stepped closer into that stillness, one measured step at a time, his nails clicking softly against the pavement, his breathing slow and steady, his eyes never leaving hers. Daniel followed, because not following was no longer an option. Not when the dog he trusted more than his own instincts was walking towards something unseen. And as he moved, he studied the girl more carefully, the way her shoulders were slightly hunched as if carrying something invisible, the way her hands hovered near her chest, fingers curling and uncurling like she was holding onto a thought she could not quite release. And then she whispered again, her lips barely parting, no sound reaching the air, no vibration carried by wind, but Rex stopped. Immediately, his body going still again, his head tilting just enough to suggest he was listening to something layered beneath silence. And Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, because there was no command for this, no training scenario that matched what he was seeing, no protocol for a dog responding to a voice that did not exist. "What is it, buddy?" Daniel murmured, softer now, less command and more question, his voice losing its edge, because somewhere between the first ignored order and this moment, something had shifted. Something inside him had begun to accept that this was not a mistake, not a glitch in training, but something deliberate, something that deserved to be followed, even if it did not make sense. The girl's eyes flickered then, not away from Rex, but deeper into him, as if she was looking through layers of memory. And for a second Daniel had the strange impression that she was not seeing the dog as he was now, but as something more, something older, something that carried stories in its bones. And Rex responded with a low, almost inaudible whine, not distress, not fear, but recognition, like a soldier hearing a familiar call sign after years of silence. Daniel's breath slowed, his surroundings fading just enough to sharpen the moment. The scent of coffee replaced by the faint metallic hint of something distant, something imagined, and he shook his head slightly, as if to clear it. But the feeling did not leave. It deepened, and Rex took another step, closing the distance between them until he stood just a few feet from the girl, his posture no longer alert but attentive, calm in a way that felt almost reverent. The leash hung loose now, Daniel's hand no longer resisting, because resisting would mean denying what was happening right in front of him, and he was not ready to do that, not when every instinct he had built in the field was telling him that Rex was not wrong, that whatever this was, it mattered. The girl lifted her hand slightly higher, her fingers trembling just enough to suggest effort, and her lips formed the shape of words again, slower this time, more deliberate, and Rex's ears twitched, his head lowering just a fraction as if leaning closer to hear, and Daniel leaned too, unconsciously, trying to catch something, anything, but there was nothing, only the steady hum of the world continuing around them. And yet, Rex understood, because his body shifted, his stance changing from stillness to readiness, like a decision had been made, like a direction had been given, and Daniel felt it then, the moment where logic stepped aside and something else took its place, something quieter, something that did not ask for permission. He swallowed, his throat dry, his eyes moving from Rex to the girl and back again, searching for answers that were not coming. And then he noticed something that made his chest tighten. Just a little more, the girl's shoes, scuffed and worn, dust clinging to them in a way that did not match the clean pavement of the square, as if she had come from somewhere else entirely, somewhere not visible from where they stood. And Rex took one final step forward, his nose lifting slightly, not to scent, but to follow, and Daniel realized with a quiet certainty that whatever Rex had heard, whatever the girl had said without saying, it was leading them somewhere just beyond the edges of what anyone else could see. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel did not issue another command, he simply followed. Rex moved before the thought fully formed, his body shifting from quiet attention into motion with a smooth certainty that felt almost guided, not rushed, not forced, just inevitable. And Daniel felt the leash slip another inch through his fingers as the dog stepped past the girl without hesitation, not stopping beside her, not circling, but continuing forward as if the true destination lay beyond her, as if she had only been the doorway and not the answer. Daniel turned instinctively to look at her, expecting movement, a follow, some sign that she would come with them. But she remained where she stood, her small frame still, her eyes soft now, almost relieved, and for a brief second their gazes met, and Daniel felt something pass between them. Not a message, not a warning, just a quiet acknowledgement, like she had done what she came to do, and then Rex gave a low breath and continued walking, pulling Daniel fully into motion. The square stretched ahead, sunlight shifting across. Brick and concrete, shadows from the trees forming long lines that pointed toward the far edge of the park where fewer people gathered, where the noise softened into something more distant, and Rex moved along that line without faltering, his path not random, not searching, but direct, like following a trail that did not exist, and Daniel followed it aside now, no longer trying to pull him back, his steps measured, his eyes scanning not for threats, but for meaning, because this was no longer about control. It was about trust, and trust had led him through worse uncertainty than this. Behind them, the sounds of the square continued unchanged, a child laughing, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the faint clang of a coffee cup against ceramic. But ahead, the air felt different, quieter, like stepping into a space that had been waiting, and Rex slowed slightly as they approached the edge of the park where a narrow service path ran between a row of low-maintenance buildings. The kind most people never noticed, painted in dull colors, doors closed, windows small and shaded, nothing about them inviting attention, nothing about them suggesting importance. And yet Rex stopped at the entrance of that path, his body still again, his head lifting just slightly as if listening once more. Daniel felt it then, that same subtle shift like standing just before a storm that never quite arrives, the air holding something unspoken, and he glanced back over his shoulder, instinct pulling him to check on the girl, but she was no longer there, the spot where she had stood now filled with nothing but passing strangers and sunlight, no trace of her blue dress, no lingering presence, just absence, clean and complete, and Daniel's chest tightened in a way he could not explain, because it did not feel like she had walked away. It felt like she had been removed, like a scene that had ended without transition. "Rex," he said quietly, not a command this time, just a name, a grounding point. And Rex responded not by looking back, but by stepping forward into the narrow path, his paws moving with that same quiet certainty, his tail low, his ears alert, and Daniel followed without question. The leash now slacked between them, no resistance left, only connection. The path was cooler, shaded by the buildings on either side, the scent of warm pavement replaced by something more neutral, faintly metallic, faintly damp, like air that had not moved much, and their footsteps echoed slightly against the walls, a soft rhythm that seemed louder than it should have been, and Rex slowed again halfway down, his head turning slightly to the right, toward a closed door set into one of the buildings, plain, unmarked, the kind of door no one would think twice about. And yet he stopped in front of it, his body still, his attention fixed, and Daniel felt his pulse shift, not faster, but deeper, heavier, like something important was about to reveal itself. Rex did not bark, did not scratch, did not signal in any trained way. He simply stood there, breathing steady, waiting, as if whatever he had heard was still speaking, still guiding. And Daniel stepped closer, his hand reaching out toward the door without fully knowing why, his fingers hovering just inches from the surface. And for a moment he hesitated, not from fear, but from the weight of the unknown, because once he opened that door, whatever this was would no longer be a question. It would become real, and behind him, somewhere beyond the walls and the path and the quiet, the world continued exactly as it had before, unaware that something unseen had just led a man and his dog to a place no one else had been asked to find. Daniel's fingers hovered for one more second, just long enough for doubt to whisper its final argument. But Rex shifted beside him, a quiet, steady presence. And that was enough, because Rex had never led him wrong. Not in the desert heat, not in the cold silence of early morning patrols, not in the moments when instinct was the only thing left to trust. And so Daniel closed the distance, his hand settling on the cool metal handle, the surface faintly rough beneath his palm, and he pushed. The door opened with a soft resistance, not locked, just unused, the kind of movement that carried the weight of still air behind it. And as it gave way, a cooler breath slipped out, brushing against his face with the faint scent of dust and something older, something untouched by the noise of the outside world. And Rex stepped forward immediately, not rushing, not charging, but entering with the same calm certainty he had carried since the moment he first lifted his ears in the square. And Daniel followed, the door easing shut behind them with a quiet click that seemed louder than it should have been. Inside, the light was dim but not dark, thin beams slipping through a narrow window high on the wall, cutting across the room in soft lines that revealed suspended dust drifting slowly through the air. And the space itself was simple, a maintenance room of some kind, shelf along one wall, a few stacked boxes, nothing remarkable, nothing that would draw attention. And yet Rex moved deeper into it, as if it held something precise, something hidden in plain sight. His steps measured, his nose lifting not to search but to follow, like he was still listening to that silent voice that had led them here. Daniel's boots echoed softly against the concrete floor, each step grounding him in the physical world, even as his mind tried to make sense of something that refused to fit into it. His eyes scanning the corners, the shelves, the faint shadows that gathered where light did not reach. And still nothing stood out, nothing obvious, nothing that explained why they were here. And yet Rex slowed near the far side of the room, his body lowering slightly, his head tilting just enough to signal focus. And Daniel felt that shift again, that quiet pull of attention that said this was the place. This was where whatever they had been brought to find existed. "What is it?" Daniel whispered, his voice softer now, almost instinctively respectful of the silence that filled the room. And Rex did not answer in any trained way, did not sit or bark or signal. He simply stepped toward a low storage unit pushed against the wall, a simple metal cabinet with a slightly bent door, the kind of thing no one would notice twice. And he stopped in front of it, his gaze fixed, his breathing steady, waiting. Daniel approached slowly, each step deliberate, his senses sharpening, the faint hum of distant city noise barely reaching through the walls, replaced instead by the quiet rhythm of Rex's breath and his own. And as he reached the cabinet, he noticed something small, something easy to miss, a thin gap where the door did not quite close all the way, just enough space to suggest it had not been shut properly. And his chest tightened slightly, not from fear but from anticipation, because this was no longer abstract, no longer something unseen. This was real, tangible, something he could touch. He crouched down, his hand moving toward the edge of the cabinet door, pausing again for just a fraction of a second. That same hesitation returning, not as doubt but as awareness, the understanding that whatever lay inside would answer the question that had been building since Rex first moved, and answers, once found, could not be undone. Beside him, Rex shifted his weight slightly, leaning closer, his presence steady, unwavering, as if encouraging, as if reminding Daniel that he was not alone in this moment, that whatever this was, they had been led here together. And Daniel exhaled slowly, his fingers closing around the edge of the metal, the cool surface grounding him one last time before he pulled, the cabinet door opening with a soft creak, just enough to reveal the shadowed interior. And in that narrow slice of space, something unexpected caught the light, something small, something that did not belong to a place like this. And Daniel felt his breath, catch as the moment finally began to unfold. The cabinet door opened just enough of the light to slip inside, and what it revealed did not match the silence of the room, did not belong to dust or storage or anything forgotten, because tucked within that narrow space was a small pair of sneakers, white once but now dulled with wear, their laces loosely tied together as if someone had set them down with care, not discarded them, and beside them, half hidden in shadow, a child's backpack rested against the metal wall, pale blue, the same shade Daniel remembered from the dress, and his breath caught, not sharply, not in panic, but in recognition that came too quickly to explain. Rex lowered his head slowly, his nose hovering just above the sneakers, not sniffing in the usual way, not searching for scent, but acknowledging, as if confirming something already known, and a soft sound left him, barely more than a breath, something between a sigh and a whine, and Daniel felt it settle deep in his chest, that quiet weight that came when truth began to surface without words. He reached in carefully, his fingers brushing against the fabric of the backpack, the material cool and slightly worn. And as he pulled it forward into the light, a faint shape caught his eye, something small stitched onto the front pocket, and he turned it just enough to see letters uneven but clear, written in a child's careful hand. Emily. The name lingered in the air between them, unspoken but present, and Daniel's mind moved quickly, searching for logic, for explanation, for a reason why a child's belongings would be hidden inside a maintenance cabinet behind a quiet path no one noticed, and nothing came. Nothing that fit, nothing that made sense, except the memory of her, standing in the square, her eyes steady, her voice unheard, guiding Rex here with a certainty that now felt impossible to ignore. Rex shifted closer, his body pressing lightly against Daniel's side, grounding him, steadying him, and Daniel exhaled slowly, his hand tightening slightly on the strap of the backpack, because this was no longer about instinct, no longer about curiosity. This was about something real, something that needed to be understood. And he opened the front pocket carefully, the zipper sliding with a soft, deliberate sound, revealing a few small items inside. A folded piece of paper, a crayon, a tiny plastic charm shaped like a star. Ordinary things, simple things, and yet placed here, they carried a weight that filled the room. He unfolded the paper slowly, the edges worn but intact, and inside was a drawing, lines uneven but intentional, a child's version of the world. And at the center of it stood a dog, tall ears, strong body, unmistakably a German shepherd, drawn with surprising detail, and beside it a smaller figure, a girl, holding the dog's fur, standing close, safe, and above them, written in careful letters, the same name again, Emily, and beneath it a second word, faint but visible. Rex. Daniel's chest tightened again, this time deeper, heavier, because this was no coincidence, this was connection, something that had been waiting, something that had called out and been answered. And he glanced at Rex, his partner, his constant, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them and the quiet truth unfolding between them. Rex looked back at him, his amber eyes steady, not confused, not searching, but knowing in the way only a dog could. Know something that lived beyond explanation. And Daniel felt that shift again, stronger now, the place where logic gave way to something else, something that did not need proof to exist. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the air heavier, not with fear, but with meaning, and Daniel stood slowly, the backpack in one hand, the drawing in the other, his mind already moving toward what came next, toward finding answers, toward understanding how a child's silent whisper could lead them here. And yet, beneath all of it was a quieter realization, one that settled without resistance, that whatever had brought them here was not random, not chance, but purpose, something intentional, something that had chosen Rex to listen when no one else could. And as Daniel looked once more at the name written in careful, uneven letters, he knew this was only the beginning, because a voice that could not be heard had just told them exactly where to look, and somewhere beyond this room, beyond the quiet and the dust, there was a reason why. Daniel did not move right away, not because he did not know what to do, but because something in that room asked him to pause, to let the moment settle before it turned into action. And Rex remained close, his body steady at Daniel's side, his presence warm and grounding against the quiet chill of the space. And for a few seconds neither of them made a sound, the drawing still in Daniel's hand, the name still clear, still undeniable. He folded the paper carefully, slower than necessary, as if rushing might disturb something unseen, then slipped it back into the backpack, his fingers brushing the small star charm as it shifted softly against the fabric, and that tiny sound echoed more than it should have, like a reminder that this was real, that this had weight, and Daniel exhaled, long and controlled, the way he had learned to do in moments when clarity mattered more than emotion. "All right," he said quietly, not to Rex alone, but to the moment itself, to whatever had led them here, and Rex responded with a subtle lift of his head, his ears flicking once, as if acknowledging the shift from discovery to decision. Daniel stood fully now, the backpack held firmly in one hand, and turned toward the door, his steps measured but purposeful, the hesitation from before replaced by something steadier, because whatever uncertainty remained had been overtaken by responsibility, and responsibility did not leave room for standing still. They moved back through the narrow path, the light growing stronger as they stepped out of the building, the warmth of the afternoon returning, the sounds of the square drifting back into place, unchanged, uninterrupted, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened a few yards away, and that contrast pressed quietly against Daniel's thoughts, the way the world could continue without noticing what mattered most. Rex walked slightly ahead now, not pulling, not leading with urgency, but with a calm direction that suggested the path forward was already known, and Daniel followed without question, his grip on the backpack steady, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings with a new awareness, because now every detail felt like it might connect, every face, every movement, every corner holding the possibility of an answer. As they reached the edge of the square again, Daniel slowed, his gaze sweeping across the open space, searching for the one detail that no longer belonged, the one absence that mattered. But the girl was still nowhere to be seen, no trace of her blue dress, no small figure standing apart from the crowd, just the steady flow of ordinary life, and yet the memory of her presence remained sharp, too precise to dismiss, too real to ignore. Rex stopped near the same spot where they had first seen her, his body still, his head turning slightly, as if retracing something invisible, and Daniel watched him closely, waiting not for a trained signal, but for that same quiet reaction that had started everything. And for a moment nothing happened, just the soft movement of people passing by, the distant hum of traffic, the flutter of a flag overhead, and then Rex lowered his head slowly, his nose hovering just above the ground, not searching in the usual way, but following, tracing something that left no visible mark. Daniel stepped closer, his attention narrowing, and he noticed it then, something small near the edge of the pavement, almost hidden where the brick met the concrete, a faint chalk line, barely visible, as if drawn lightly and then worn down by footsteps, and beside it another mark, softer, curved like part of a circle, and Daniel crouched, setting the backpack down carefully as he examined it, his fingers brushing the surface gently, and though the lines were faint, they formed something recognizable, the outline of a star, simple, uneven, but deliberate. His chest tightened again, not with confusion this time, but with understanding, because the same shape hung from the zipper of the backpack, the same small symbol connecting the hidden room to this open space, connecting what had been found to where it had begun. And Rex gave a soft breath beside him, his tail moving once, slow and certain, as if confirming that this was not coincidence, that this was a path, a sequence, something left behind to be followed. Daniel stood again, his mind moving quickly now, the pieces beginning to align, the silent signal, the hidden belongings, the marks on the ground, all of it forming a direction rather than a question. And he looked out across the square once more, not searching for the girl anymore, but for where she had been leading them next, because whatever had started with a whisper had not ended in that room. It had only pointed them forward, and Rex, already turning, already stepping toward the far side of the square, made it clear that they were not done yet. Rex did not hesitate this time. His movement immediate, quiet but certain, as if the faint chalk star had confirmed something already unfolding inside him, and Daniel grabbed the backpack again without thinking, rising quickly to follow, his steps falling into rhythm beside the dog as they crossed the square with a purpose that now felt undeniable. The afternoon light had shifted slightly, longer shadows stretching across the pavement, the sounds of the crowd continuing in soft layers around them. But Daniel barely registered any of it now, because every sense he had was focused forward on Rex on the path, on the invisible thread that seemed to be pulling them both in the same direction, and Rex led them past the coffee stand, past the fountain where children laughed and splashed water into the air, past the rows of benches where people sat unaware of anything beyond their own moment, until the square began to thin again, opening toward a quieter side street lined with older buildings, their brick facades worn with time, windows reflecting a softer, dimmer version of the day. Rex slowed only once, just enough to glance back, not for permission, but for alignment, and Daniel gave it without words, a slight nod, a steady presence. And they continued, turning down the side street where the noise of the square faded into a distant murmur, replaced by a quieter atmosphere. The faint hum of an air conditioner, the distant creak of a sign moving in the breeze, the soft echo of their own footsteps against the sidewalk. Halfway down the block, Rex stopped again, not abruptly, but with that same controlled stillness, his body aligning with something. Just ahead, and Daniel followed his gaze to a narrow alley between two buildings, the kind of place people passed without looking, shadowed, uninviting, yet not dangerous, just forgotten. And there, near the entrance, faint against the concrete, was another chalk mark, the same uneven star, barely visible but unmistakable now that he knew what to look for. Daniel felt a quiet shift inside him, not surprise anymore, but confirmation, the pattern becoming clearer with each step, and Rex moved into the alley without pause, his paws silent against the ground, his body low but not tense, guided, not cautious, and Daniel followed, the space narrowing around them, the light dimming as the walls rose on either side, trapping the warmth of the day into a softer, heavier air. The alley stretched about 30 feet, ending in a small open area behind the buildings, a service space with a few dumpsters, a stack of wooden pallets, nothing unusual, nothing that would draw attention. And yet Rex walked straight through it, ignoring everything except a small wooden structure tucked against the far wall, a weathered shed no more than 6 feet wide, its paint chipped, its doors slightly ajar, and Daniel felt his pulse deepen again, that same quiet weight settling in, because this place, like the cabinet before it, did not belong to coincidence. Rex approached the shed slowly, his head lowering again, his ears flicking as if catching something just beneath the surface of silence. And Daniel stepped up beside him, his hand resting briefly on Rex's back, feeling the steady warmth, the calm certainty that had not wavered since this began. And for a moment they stood there together, man and dog, at the threshold of something unseen, something waiting. Daniel pushed the door gently, the wood shifting with a soft creak, and inside the space was dim, smaller than the room before, with just enough light filtering through a cracked panel to reveal its contents, a few old tools, a coil of rope, and in the far corner, something that made Daniel stop completely, something that did not belong to tools or storage or neglect, a small blanket, folded but not neatly, placed on top of a flattened piece of cardboard, and beside it a water bottle, half full, the plastic slightly worn, and Daniel felt his breath slow, his mind quieting in a way that felt almost reverent, because this was not just a place, this was a space that had been used, lived in, recently, and Rex stepped forward, his nose lowering toward the blanket, his body still calm, but now carrying a deeper awareness. And then he looked back at Daniel, his eyes steady, not asking, not searching, but telling him something without words, something simple and heavy and undeniable, that whatever they had been following, whatever silent voice had guided them here, it had not been about the past alone. It was about now, about something that still mattered, something that had not yet been resolved, and Daniel felt it settle fully inside him. The understanding that this path was not finished, that the quiet signal had not ended, and that somewhere just beyond what they could see, there was still one more step waiting to be taken. Daniel stepped fully into the shed, the faint scent of dust and wood settling around him. But beneath it there was something else, something warmer, recent, human, and it lingered just enough to confirm what his instincts were already telling him, that this space had not been abandoned, that it had been used not long ago, maybe hours, maybe less, and Rex moved carefully across the small floor, his paws light, deliberate, as if respecting something unseen, his head lowering again near the blanket, his nose hovering just above it without touching, and then he turned slightly, shifting his focus toward the back wall, where a narrow gap between the boards let in a thin line of daylight. Daniel followed that line with his eyes, noticing how it cut across the floor and stopped just beside a small object half hidden in shadow, and he crouched slowly, his movements controlled, his breath steady, reaching out to pick it up, and as his fingers closed around it, he realized it was another. Crayon, blue, worn at the tip, the same color as the faint chalk stars they had followed, and that connection tightened something inside him. Not fear, not confusion, but clarity, the kind that came when separate pieces began to align into a single path. Rex gave a soft sound then, barely audible, his body shifting closer to Daniel, and for a moment the room felt smaller, not in space but in meaning, everything inside it pointing towards something just beyond, something not yet visible, but very close. And Daniel stood again, the crayon in his hand, the backpack still hanging at his side, his eyes scanning the walls more carefully now. And that was when he noticed it, a second opening, not a door, not obvious, but a panel slightly misaligned near the back corner, just enough to suggest it could move, just enough to break the pattern of the boards. He stepped toward it slowly, his hand lifting, pressing lightly against the wood, and it shifted with a faint resistance before giving way, opening just enough to reveal a narrow space behind the shed, a hidden gap that led to a small, enclosed area between buildings, shielded from the street, quiet, unseen. Rex moved first, slipping through the opening with ease, his body disappearing into the dim space beyond, and Daniel followed immediately, pushing the panel wider and stepping through after him, the air changing again as he entered. Cooler, more enclosed, the sounds of the outside world almost completely gone. The space was small, no more than a few feet across, bordered by brick on one side and wood on the other, and at first it seemed empty, just another forgotten corner, until Daniel saw movement, slight, subtle, near the far edge where the light barely reached, and he stopped, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment, because this was it. This was where the path had been leading. Rex approached slowly, his posture low but calm, his tail still, his ears forward, and then he lowered himself gently, his body settling onto the ground in a quiet, deliberate motion that Daniel had only seen a few times before, a gesture of reassurance, of presence, of safety, and Daniel felt his chest tighten as he stepped closer, his eyes adjusting to the dimness, his focus sharpening, and there, curled near the wall, partially hidden in shadow, was a small figure, a child, still, breathing softly, wrapped in the edge of a thin blanket, her hair falling across her face in quiet strands. Daniel's breath slowed, the world narrowing to that single point, because this was no longer a question, no longer a mystery. This was a life, fragile and present, and Rex stayed where he was, close but not overwhelming, his presence steady, grounding, as if he understood exactly what was needed in this moment. Daniel knelt carefully, his movements slow, respectful, his voice soft as he spoke, not loud, not urgent, but gentle. "Hey there," and the child stirred slightly, her fingers moving just enough to show she was aware, just enough to confirm she was there, and Daniel felt something shift inside him, something deeper than relief, something closer to gratitude, because whatever had brought them here, whatever silent signal had started this path, it had not been empty. It had led to something real, something that mattered. And as he looked back at Rex, his partner, his constant, he understood with a quiet certainty that this was why the dog had listened, why he had moved, why he had trusted something no one else could hear. Because sometimes the smallest voice, the quietest whisper, was the one that carried the most truth. The girl's eyes opened slowly, not startled, not afraid, just aware, as if waking from a place deeper than sleep. And for a moment she did not move, her gaze settling first on Rex, who remained lying a few feet away, calm and steady, his presence quiet but undeniable. And then her eyes shifted to Daniel, studying him with the same stillness, the same quiet recognition that felt strangely familiar. And Daniel kept his voice low, gentle, the kind of tone that did not demand, only invited. "You are safe," he said, each word measured, clear, and the girl blinked once, slowly, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the blanket before relaxing again. And then she nodded, just a small motion, but enough to tell him she understood. Daniel let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, the tension in his shoulders easing as the moment softened, and Rex shifted slightly, his tail moving once against the ground, a quiet acknowledgement that the distance between fear and safety had just closed. Daniel reached for the radio clipped to his vest, his voice calm as he called it in, giving location, requesting assistance, his words steady, professional, but beneath them there was something else, something quieter, something he would not say out loud, because how do you explain a path that begins with a whisper no one hears? How do you explain a dog that listens to something beyond sound? And he did not try. He simply spoke what could be understood and let the rest remain where it belonged. The girl watched him as he spoke, her gaze never leaving his face. And when he finished, she shifted slightly, pushing herself up just enough to sit, the blanket falling loosely around her shoulders, and Daniel noticed then how small she really was, how light, how fragile in a way that had nothing to do with weakness, just time, just being young in a world that did not always slow down enough to notice. And he offered his hand, not pulling, just there, and after a second, she took it, her fingers small but steady, and he helped her up gently. Rex rose as well, moving closer but not crowding, his presence forming a quiet triangle between them. And for a moment, the three of them stood in that narrow space, the world outside still distant, still unaware. And then the girl looked past Daniel, toward the opening behind him, her eyes softening in a way that shifted something inside him again, because it was the same look, the same quiet relief he had seen before. Daniel followed her gaze instinctively, turning just slightly, and for a brief second, just long enough to question whether it had truly happened, he saw her, the other girl, the one from the square, standing at the edge of the opening, the pale blue dress catching the light, her hair moving gently as if touched by a breeze that did not reach them. And she was smiling, not wide, not bright, but enough to say it was finished, enough to say thank you without needing words. Daniel blinked, and she was gone, the space empty again, the light unchanged, and he did not speak, did not try to explain it, because some things once seen did not need to be proven. They simply settled into place, quiet and certain. The distant sound of approaching voices began to filter in, footsteps, the soft murmur of people responding to the call, the world returning, and Daniel guided the girl gently toward the opening, Rex walking at her side now, closer than before, his shoulder brushing lightly against her leg, as if making sure she did not feel alone. And when they stepped back into the light, the afternoon had not changed. The sky still clear, the square still alive, everything exactly as it had been, except for the quiet shift that now lived beneath it. Later, when the questions came, when the reports were written and the story moved beyond that moment into something people could understand, there would be words like found, like located, like assisted, and there would be footage, grainy clips of a German shepherd leading a Marine through a crowd, headlines that called him a hero, that said what he did next went everywhere. But Daniel would remember something else, something smaller, something quieter, the way Rex had listened before anyone else knew there was something to hear, the way a whisper had carried farther than sound, and the way sometimes, just sometimes, the world leaves a trail not for the many, but for the one who is willing to follow it. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the light softened into gold, Daniel sat beside Rex, his hand resting against the dog's neck, feeling the steady warmth, the quiet life that had guided him through something he still could not fully explain. And Rex leaned into the touch just slightly, calm, grounded, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. And maybe that was the truth of it. Maybe for him it had not been unusual. Maybe he had simply done what he was always meant to do: listen, trust, follow. And somewhere in the quiet space between breath and memory, Daniel understood. Not everything, not completely, but enough to know that some signals are never spoken, some paths are never seen. And yet, for those willing to listen, they're always there. In a quiet American town, a U.S. Marine and his highly trained German Shepherd, K9, uncover a mystery that begins with a silent whisper no one else can hear. What follows is one of those unforgettable animal stories where instinct, loyalty, and something deeper guide them beyond logic into a hidden path of truth. As the Marine learns to trust his K9 partner in ways training alone cannot explain, they follow subtle signs left behind by a child whose presence seems both real and beyond reach, leading them through forgotten spaces, faint chalk symbols, and quiet places no one notices. This journey unfolds as one of the most powerful animal stories, where every step forward reveals not just clues, but emotional connections that challenge what we believe about intuition and trust. The bond between the Marine and his dog becomes the center of a story that blends discipline with faith, showing how a German Shepherd can respond to signals that exist beyond sound, making this one of those rare animal stories that stays with you long after it ends. As they uncover a hidden space and find a child in need, the meaning of loyalty takes on a new depth, proving that some animal stories are not just about rescue, but about listening to what the world often ignores through quiet moments, subtle emotions, and a deeply cinematic narrative. This story highlights the unspoken connection between humans and animals, making it one of the most moving animal stories you will experience, where Marine and his K9 remind us that sometimes the smallest signal can lead to the greatest act of compassion.